Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Jen, for the introduction. Greta has already done a great work of actually setting up why the UN system is so acutely interested in this. And for those that are maybe less familiar with the World Bank, let me just summarize this in 2 sentences. The World Bank is an international development organization. It's AAA rated. It is operating in about 120 countries. Its annual lending financial volume is somewhere in the order of 50 billion, likely to go up to about 100 billion. And it is an organization that has a very particular DNA that is relevant for this discussion. It is based on data, on financing instruments, and very importantly, on the knowledge that comes from implementing this, both with public sector as well as with private sector partners. So what I wanted to do today is I want to answer 3 questions. Why do we care about this? What are we doing about it? And give you some ideas of where are we in terms of applications. And it's very purposefully set emerging practices because I think we are on stage 1. Agenda 2030, when it was negotiated, the Sustainable Development Goal, the one thing that leaders of governments were not fully aware of was actually the implication of technology. This is only 3 years ago, and now we really see the international community very much catching up to what the power of technology can be with respect to human progress. And there are 3 issues that always come up. The first one is we need ethical standards before the impacts are irreversible. The second one is a deep concern about let us not have technology drive even further inequality across and within countries. And the third one is the understanding that if you want to find solutions, the notion of a nation state is very quickly overtaken by the fact that a lot of the issues need really global interaction and global consensus building. This is a set of quotes. I won't read them all by President Macron in March. And I thought it was a very interesting way of actually capturing what does a leader of an OECD country contemplate with respect to AI. He said basically this is for us an opportunity to reset regulation, financing, the way we operate. The second issue is I want it to be totally federalized, which is another way of saying I know this is going to lead to a lot of disruption, to job losses, to retraining. How do I make sure that our society is actually able to deal with this? The third one, which is very interesting, he said this is a fundamental challenge for our preference and for democracy. So in that sense, yes, it is a technological revolution, but at its core, it is really a political revolution. Very importantly, as a political leader, he has to make a very clear statement in terms of that this does not reinforce biases in gender, age, or individual characteristics. So the push to actually rely on consumer preferences for releasing data and for the government to really insist on opening some of the algorithm is another very important part of this. And then the final one is, if you want to frame this, you have to play at an international stage and you have to really get engaged now. Now, interestingly enough, if this was France, Mexico, just a few months ago, or just a few weeks ago, I was in Mexico City at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Mexico has given a lot of thoughts to what AI specifically means in terms of opportunities and risks as far as all of the SDGs are concerned. And I've just taken this one slide out, which just looked at the implications of AI with respect to productivity, job losses, retraining. What are some of the positive and negative implications? And then finally, for those that are familiar with Industry Revolution 4.0, I want to borrow a slide from my Japanese friends who are really thinking about Society 5.0. And I think what they really are trying to capture in this one slide is that for technology to really have an impact, we need to really center this in a vision of a human-centered society. This interplay between physical and human elements really cuts across all of these different technologies. So much for context. So what have we done in the World Bank about this? One of the most important aspects of going through transformation is, of course, to start ground zero, which is where are we internally? And my observation, and I'm sure you are very familiar with this, is if you are just trying to orient strategy around individual technologies, you become very quickly paralyzed. So what we have done is we have taken a step back and sort of said, looking at 200 of these disruptive technologies, what are some of the broad meta trends that our clients are concerned about, that are disrupting development pathways? What are some of the risks and opportunities? And this is sort of in one slide the summary of months of work and many discussions internally. These are really the 5 trends that we see of defining the future path as far as technology is concerned. The first one, quite obviously, is the question of what is the future trajectory of platforms. Right now, it's very transaction-based, but clearly we can see this for connection, for learning, and for producing. Question here, of course, is this about monopoly? How do we ensure that there's equitable access? What is the relationship and the negotiation between the platform organizers and owners and those that want to onboard or those that want to regulate the platforms? The second issue deals really with the fundamental change in cost curves brought about by disruptive technologies, and that is for us a really important opportunity for expanding access to agriculture, to utilities, to health, and to education. Delivery models are shifting, new superfoods are emerging, so in other words, this whole question of how do we bring these different converging technologies together is a question that we are very interested in because we really see that as providing finally answers to the question of access. The third one is human and machine interaction. We are obviously working at the interface of a lot of our clients, knowing that they have to create millions of jobs at scale. What is the future there? The fourth one deals with adapt to thrive, which is if this is really the future of work and we are not going to have a lifelong employment, how do we continuously upgrade our skills in order to remain competitive? And the fifth one, which is really important, just like all of you, a deep concern globally about the erosion of trust in institutions and governments and the challenge to legitimacy of state-run institutions. So the question is, what does government actually have to do in terms of redefining the social contract with its citizens to build up trust, to make sure that biases don't become the prevailing wisdom, and to make sure that the positive power of technologies is being harnessed? We've turned this into a number of scenarios, and all I want to leave you with in this scenario is really, this is a world where uncertainty is the new normal, and many of these scenarios will play out simultaneously. There will be countries that are able to adopt technologies faster. There are countries that will have public policies that ensure equitable sharing. And then there are many which are really right now grappling with the question of, are we going to be disenfranchised? Are we going to be left behind? To formulate a value proposition for the World Bank, we have asked ourselves, what could we be doing? And this is very aspirational. We want to really see ourselves as an organization that has a global reach and global convening authority and trust to engage with governments and people, to coordinate development partners, and to mobilize the private sector to do 3 things. And as always, in order to make it memorable, we have alliterated this, so we have picked the letter B. Build is very much about laying the foundation for a technology-enabled economy. Boost is about really instilling and expanding the capacity of people as well as of institutions to thrive as resilient society in the face of disruption. And Broker is very much at this question of we think we are very good in defining development solutions, development problems. The question now is how do we engage with technology partners around data, around technology, and around shared expertise to find solutions. So let me give you and walk you very quickly through 9 examples around Build, Boost, and Broker. A very important Build example is the fact that we need to find a solution to the fact that 1.1 billion people do not have an ID. In other words, they are not registered anywhere. So for us, a very important question is, can we bring digital ID to scale to those that are currently disenfranchised in terms of financial services, social safety nets, health services, and so on? A really big, important aspect of progress this year is that we have identified shared principles, that we have really formed a coalition with private sector as well as with other international organizations, that we are really starting to see multiple countries really agreeing and understanding the importance of this. So I would say this is clearly one of the fundamental building blocks of any digital society. And these are some of the emerging lessons that are coming out. I don't want you to read all of this, but it's very interesting when you start looking at what it takes to be successful. Identification from birth to death, minimal approach to basic identity, inclusive approach, focus on the use cases, make sure that you work on open standards. I'm sure those are all very familiar to you, for us, this is really a core set of principles in terms of really rolling this out in a way that is scalable. And then there are quite a number of technologies that are really coming on stream, which we are trying to harness in order to build this out further. A second example, which is just right now on the drawing board, is one of the biggest challenges in Africa is digital divide. And in order to solve this problem, or to address it comprehensively, we have formulated now a plan that really looks at multiple platforms, digital broadband, digital infrastructure, financial services, digital entrepreneurship, in order to come up with an overall integrated approach as opposed to trying to do one after the other. One of the frequently asked questions is, what does this mean for regulation? And we are very concerned about the enabling environment, and there's obviously a very strong tension between, on the one hand, regulation that was built in the 20th century and the thrust and the motivation of innovators of the 21st century. So the structure of government, the speed with which government understands and responds, and the way it sets new frameworks and new sandboxes, I think is clearly a challenge that many governments are starting to grapple with. On the point of boosting, let me leave this picture with you. This is the brain of 2 3-month-old children in Bangladesh. The one on the left side is that failed to really get enough nourishment, and you can see the implications in terms of formation of neural networks and neural links in its brain. The right one is that is healthy and cared for child. Now, when we start really taking this all-of-life approach to this, one of the very important questions that governments really need to focus on is education. We have just released a study that says 65% of the wealth of nation is actually based on human capital formation. And the difference between good schooling and bad schooling is that of 5 years. So if you compare what it means to be in school in Singapore, which is a leader for 1 year, that basically means you need 5 years equivalent teaching in Ghana, Malawi, or Yemen. So we want to really put a big push towards human capital formation and to really make it very visible to everyone, government leaders, private investors, that investment in human capacity matters greatly. Where are the jobs of the future? We have a World Development Report that is coming out in October that will address this question, and this is just sort of one of the teaser slides in terms of trying to project forward what are some of the future skill needs, some of the future capabilities that need to be formed now in order to actually remain competitive. A final point in terms of boosting is, of course, the whole question of what does it mean for the capacity of governments. And this is sort of an overall slide from our colleagues in governance. Those are the ones that work directly with the public sector. And it's really quite an interesting puzzle piece. You see applications that deal with improving the quality of procurement. You see the use of biometric data to ensure salary disbursement in Somalia. You see big data analytics in terms of really trying to see land use patterns. So in other words, we are really actively working and trying to grapple with the question of what is an effective utilization of new technologies, including AI, in the formation and in the function of governments. Final point, in my last 2 minutes, hopefully I'm going to get 1 more minute, which is the most interesting part, of course, how do we work with private tech companies? And this is sort of an overview of currently our portfolio, at least as far as the most high-level engagements are concerned. It really gives you a sense. Right now we are working on proof of concept engagements with the private sector, and I wanted to give you a couple of examples to show you what that means. The first one is Airbnb, and we are trying to really be pretty systematic when it comes down to this engagement. We want to harness data. We want to understand what is the impact of sharing economy platforms in South Asia. The second one is we want to harness technology. In this particular case, we are working with Airbnb in 3 countries, Cape Town, Peru, and India, to really start figuring out how do we optimize the hosting and the digital onboarding of women, female hosts. And we want to influence industry. So we are using these engagements also to see what would a responsible management of sharing economies would look like in terms of taxation, in terms of regulation. What are the industry standards around gender, for instance? A second example is coming from Haiti. And here, this slide basically gives you a sense of Port-au-Prince. It's a 1 million and more city. What is really striking when you look at cell phone data is how much the density of population in Port-au-Prince changes in the course of a 12-hour cycle. So what it really tells you is a lot of people are spending a lot of time commuting into Port-au-Prince and then commuting back out, and that's drawn from cell phone data. That has big implications because we are also at the same time working with Haiti to build a new transport system. Now, transport engineers, if you map them, they will basically build a road. Now, if you connect them to mobile cell phone data, that changes the entire perspective of what are the right routes to build in order to actually accommodate and influence and really serve people that need to rely on these. So it has had a really important, even in a very data-poor environment like Haiti, it had a very important impact on really mobilizing our own understanding of what it takes to capitalize on these opportunities. And I think this is a very important way of how we think about disruptive technology. The Haiti example has obviously spread across the entire institution, and since we have a very large transport portfolio, the expectation is this is something that could inform our work in another 70 countries over the course of the coming years. Final example is Project Artemis, and that's probably the purest example of an AI application where we are trying to use AI partnerships with the UN system and private sector actors to deal with one particular topic and major problem, which is can we improve the predictability of famine incidents? Can we then create a way of building an insurance mechanism that allows us to mitigate some of the price spikes? Can we improve our own logistics in advance of this? It has a lot to do with using social data, geospatial data, conflict information, public expenditure data, radio signals, in order to actually build an overall understanding in the algorithm of what it would take to start predicting better when famine is going to hit. So it's really an important signature initiative in terms of really marrying the potential of the AI industry with our understanding of our client engagements at some of the toughest situations in the world. So I wanted to leave this with you in terms of a real inspirational future possibility. And then I wanted to leave you with this sentence from Buckminster Fuller, who says, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, you need to build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." And I think that's, in the broad context of what I've outlined, very much sort of what is inspiring us to take this look at policy as well as emerging practices. Thank you very much.